Okay. I hope you all read both of the plays. I think that it's really important for the discussion that we'll have after these plays, because section 9 and 10 one of them deals specifically with Prometheus, and Alcestis may be there, but it's Euripides that's really important to see the differences between what Aeschylus is doing and what Euripides does. So here we go. Wrong one. Let me try that again. Okay, so this is Nietzsche's argument in a nutshell. I kind of just pulled a lot of this together. Greek tragedy emerged as a synthesis of two opposing artistic impulses, the Apollinian and the Dionysian. The Apollinian represents the principles of individuation, clarity and form, beauty, order, and rationality, and finds expression in the plastic arts, such as sculpture and architecture. Contrarily, the Dionysian represents the forces of chaos, intoxication, and ecstasy, and finds expression in music, dance, and communal rituals, emphasizing the dissolution of boundaries and the unity of all existence. Greek tragedy showcases the profound existential and aesthetic insights that emerge from the tension between order and chaos, form and dissolution. Tragedy represents a synthesis of the structured Apollinian world of dreams and illusions and the chaotic Dionysian forces of nature and primal instincts, and originated from ancient rituals and religious ceremonies, the Dionysian dithyrambs. These rituals involved ecstatic dances, music, and communal celebrations that allowed participants to experience a sense of unity with the natural world and the divine. The role of the chorus in Greek tragedy is a representation of the Dionysian spirit. The chorus plays a central role in Greek tragedy, serving as a collective voice that comments on the action, expresses emotions, and participates in the performance of the play. It embodies the collective voice of the community, expressing primal emotions and participating in the audience's cathartic experience of tragedy. So when you read one of these things, this is a Greek vase representing Prometheus. You don't quite get, I know you know this already, but it's particularly important with tragedy that you don't, it's a very different experience to just read. You're missing the visuals, you're missing the music, you're missing the actual visual movement of the people. So this is a vase painting from Greece. This is a more vivid painting from much later, probably around the Renaissance. And this was what they looked like on the stage. The actors wore masks. I don't know if they wore hoods or not, but I found this somewhere and I thought this was really interesting. And here's another one. This is probably from the Orestia. And I guess that she is Athena. Oh, no, it's Medea because she's got his head in her hand. Wow, I just saw that. Yeah. So this is what the actors would have looked like in ancient Greece. So the Getty here in Los Angeles staged a version of Prometheus. And to just show you what you can do with this kind of thing, in almost any interpretation. Whoops. This was what they had at the amphitheater at the Getty Villa in Malibu. And this was just an absolutely amazing experience because this was so awesomely staged. And they had music and they chanted, and that's what takes, and this is Io from the same production. And then this is Prometheus at the end. of the play. And it was just a really amazing experience to go through this thing. So this is my take on the whole thing. The audience believes in the reality of the Olympians and experiences Prometheus as a Titan personified. Remember that thing about the chorus is the wall and the stage is the natural stage where these characters appear. And it's important to remember this, I think, they are citizens, the audience, of the world's first democracy, whose leaders were elected. The tragedies were staged with all the trappings of drama, music, spectacle, and masks. The chorus is the wall that separates the audience from the natural world of the stage itself. And epic heroism is expressed with lyric poetry. That's something else that we miss with an English translation. And these are just a couple of notes that I made about what is life affirming in a tragedy. The endless pain and suffering Prometheus goes through and his willingness to endure it. And Io is promised that she will be the ancestor of the hero who saves Prometheus and releases him from his suffering, and have a coastline named in her honor of her presence there. So there's a future down the road for her to anticipate, is basically what I think that is all about. And these are some quotes that I grabbed out of the text. And I just call it life lessons. Everyone who's ruling power is new, is cruel, and ruthless. And these are the lines where that's located at. And Prometheus says, I must endure as best I can the fate I have been given, for I know well that no one can prevail against the strength of harsh necessity. And again, I helped Zeus, that tyrant of the gods. Now he repays me with this foul torment. It is a sickness which somehow comes with every tyranny, to place no trust in friends. And again, I think these kinds of lines, it's important to realize that these were Democrats. They did not have a king. Anyone who shows no pity for your agonies, Prometheus, has a heart of iron and is made out of rock. As for myself, of course, I had no wish to see them, and now I have. My heart is full of grief. So I just tried to grab a few things that I thought approached what Nietzsche has been developing as how tragedy developed from these opposing influences. George.
Yeah, so I read, when you read that first part, it's sort of sparked some ideas, and I think what should be read is that Nietzsche thinks that the Dionysian, right, the Apollinian, right, that rationality, that is secondary to the Dionysian, right, that is really where the essence of man lies, right, and that's what the chorus represents. And this is why people enjoy these tragedies, because at their core, they're really in many ways emotional creatures. They don't, again, in their authenticity, they're not truly rational, I would submit, or not fully rational. Their emotion is more a dominant feature of their psychology.
Yeah, or the emotions might even influence their rationality. I would, the only thing I would disagree with you on is that Nietzsche's making the claim, and you may feel the way you do, and you're making a pretty good case that might be the case, but Nietzsche would say that this is a fusion of the Dionysian and the Apollinian. Neither one is dominant. The emotional content of the Dionysian emotional content and the music that would be present is discovered in the words, the costumes, the dances, the things on the stage.
Could you put back up that first quote, maybe?
Yeah, sure. You mean the first thing I wrote and presented? The very first slide?
Yes, the very first slide, yes.
Okay, hold on.
Okay. Yeah, where he says, he really, the world of dreams and the Dionysian forces of nature and primal instincts originate from the ancient rituals and religious ceremonies. The rituals involve ecstatic dances. I mean, so even even his read of history, right, is, oh, this is, and Nietzsche's one, again, what people argue about him is that he valued more of a tribal mode of thinking than a rational, universalist mode of thinking. So, I mean, and again, of course, I understand your point that you could read that as, well, it's equal parts reason, beauty, form in the sort of ethereal sense versus emotion, again, dominance of your emotions. It could be read as an equal, but I think that, again, the whole totality of Nietzschean thought, and again, even that appeal to history, I think is very important, right? He's basically saying that's authentic man. In other words, as man becomes more and more rational, he becomes alienated from himself. He becomes alienated from his true authenticity. Again, that's my read of it. I understand you could have a different one.
Yeah, well, all I'm trying to do is get at what Nietzsche is saying about this whole thing. So the emotional content is contained in the words that the characters are saying and reading, and then the chorus responds, and especially in Prometheus, there's a great response almost every single time the chorus shows up. Nicole.
I think I get what George said about, Nietzsche's predilection leaning towards the Dionysians, the principle, because I think he said, before he got really mad, he said he was essentially like a Dionysian himself. I think it's like his constant reconciliation between his rationality and his madness, like emotional outbursts. I think that's something he's always been struggling with. According to like what I read, I interpret it. But but also agree with Lindsay what she said about, I think Nietzsche in the book, he actually says at the bottom of the things, the essence of the human existence is actually not suffering. It's actually that kind of calm, joyous ecstasy at the bottom of things. I think that's like the very, very good balance between the Dionysian and the Apollinian principle. Like you had to find like a middle ground in the between, because I think Apollinian represents this very Apollinian calm, the rationality, but at the same time, when we let our emotional out, it doesn't need to be very chaotic, doesn't need to be very kind of out of control. Obviously, it's boundless, but it can also be spacious and free, in the frame. So it's kind of like the oscillating between the two, but at the same time, it's unity of the two. That's what I feel like he's trying to say.
Yeah, I would choose fusion, but unity expresses that. And again, the Apollinian part of Apollonian, I'm saying it wrong. I think it's Apollonian. Part of it is like I said before, the text. That's the Apollonian expression of the Dionysian. It identifies it, it gives it form, it gives it shape, it gives it structure in the plot of the story that's being told. The emotion is the fundamental part of it, and the chorus. This is a wrenching experience if you see it on the stage, because these people are crying and not screaming exactly, but shrieking and making you're so caught up in that part of it, but you're watching this structure like what I showed you in the picture. That's a totally Apollonian contribution to the whole. Without that, you wouldn't have the same kind of power. James.
Okay, yeah, I'm a little confused by reading these. Am I muted? No. Okay, so I'm a little confused in my reading. I didn't really see a reconstitution or kind of like a strong kind of like flavor of Nietzsche's takeaways. Although I don't think he was talking so much about Prometheus, right? I think he was talking about a different play at that point. That's coming, maybe that's coming up in the next sections. We haven't gotten there yet. So maybe this is like a little early in terms of like Nietzsche's points, but I don't get the Dionysian point about the chorus that much from the plays themselves. I more get the idea that the chorus was a kind of a technique, especially with the Alcestis. The Alcestis is more of a kind of a way to have two tiers. In other words, to create a two-tier, not so much a two-tier experience for the audience, but two tiers of quality, just like in a symphony orchestra concerto, where the pianist comes and the pianist plays, and whoever the solo instrument is showing their skills off in front of the orchestra, and there's a soloist. They're soloists, singer soloists or player soloists, but the soloist is the spotlight, and the orchestra is a little less important. And I see it that way. The chorus is like, well, you don't consider it that important, but the theater is saving a lot of money because all these members of the chorus include people who can actually play characters. They interrogate the characters in the play. So there's an economic reason for the chorus to be there. It's a lower designation, skill designation, but yet they're there as interrogators and basically thinkers, right? They're a thinking chorus. They're commenting on a lot of the actual importance of the actions that are happening on the stage or might happen. And actually, in the Prometheus, I see he constantly has to turn around and talk to the chorus because the chorus is valuable, and he has to confront them with the facts as he knows them, and their curiosity is one of the main kind of values in the play, that they hold Prometheus to explain his crime, and his ostensible crime, and what it is, what the predictions are of the future that he is so confident about. So yeah, so it's kind of like that part of it is a little confusing to me. Alcestis was a real find. I like both of the plays. Plays are great. The Alcestis was it's like my family. I mean, everything that happened in my life, it's about me. Everything that happened in my life kind of is talked about in Alcestis. The parents that disappoint you, I'm talking for too long. Sorry.
James, can you hear me? James, can you hear me?
I heard you. Yeah. Thank you.
We're not talking about Alcestis yet. We're talking about Prometheus. Just
okay.
When we get to
but I talked a bit about that. I love the play. I'm a kind of like interested in drama, and this really hit the spot. This great.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. The point of identification for the audience, as Nietzsche was observing earlier, is the chorus. The audience is the chorus, and they're the ones that express the emotions the audience is going to feel. You're watching the benefactor of mankind being chained to a rock in the mountains somewhere, and they are just destroyed and fraught and emotionally troubled and can't believe what's happening before their eyes. And they express those Dionysian feelings in Apollinian terms. But you don't know, the audience doesn't identify with Prometheus because the chorus is there to provide the emotional content and the curiosity of the audience. Prometheus is just telling his story. George.
what I wanted to say was I wanted to go back to this issue because I really do believe this passage in the discussion is about the relationship between emotion and reason. And what I'm going to say broadly about Nietzsche is that he's viewed as an anti-Enlightenment thinker, precisely because he thinks at the core, we are driven by our emotions, our desires. Indeed, if you and the Enlightenment actually is imposed, the Apollonian is imposed. You had some interesting quotes where you said, Zeus, that tyrant, right? He's imposing this on me, right? He's imposing this. So the reason, rationality, law is imposed by the ruling class. People are dominated by their emotions. This is why when you see this play, these plays are really about the people's ability to express their emotions, to give them full vent. And so again, I mean, I think this is at the core of Nietzschean thought and what makes him a distinct thinker from, again, the Enlightenment thinkers, Hegel, Locke, Marx, right? Those thinkers prioritize reason and find justice in reason. Nietzsche, it's about the emotion. It's about the being authentic, right? Look, our past is all about emotion. These things, reason and laws are external to that. Thank you.
Okay, just a reminder, we're at the beginning of Nietzsche. We're not in the middle or at the end. And right now, this is the first book. And we don't know where it's going to go, but we're going to find out. And I think in this book, he's still under the influence of Schopenhauer. And this is his first book. And he is exploring this notion of how did tragedy begin. And that's kind of really all that, it's not quite all that's going on. As we get into further chapters, that's when the more philosophically oriented conversations are going to come in, 9 and 10 in particular. Actually, the ones after that. Nicole.
Sorry. I just want to make 2 comments. Coming back to what George said about the emotion part, I think I really get what you said, because it's all about Dionysian's, the boundlessness. But if you look in that book, in the very beginning of the chapters where he quoted the Schopenhauer, he said the ideal, the principle individuation is about being individual sitting in this boat on the boundless sea, facing all the things coming and going by yourself. So I think he's implying this emotional embracing the world in a very kind of calming, composed way. So I think when he said about emotion, he doesn't mean you have to be super emotional. And, when we say being authentic, doesn't mean we go out of control. It means like in this boundless, limitless space, we still have control within ourselves. And that is really ties back to that Apollinian calm. I think that's how I read it. But I do agree with, like emotion is so important, right? That's not, the human experience is about experience everything within the range of emotion. It's not about cold logic. Cold logic can never make us feel happy. It's about the emotions. And another thing I want to say is that when Lindsay said, I think that the point you made is really spot on, because you said about like the audience is the chorus helps the chorus helps the audience to feel, right? I think the thing is in the first play, the Prometheus Bound, I think I agree with James. I think the thing is the thing we didn't get from the chorus, it's actually not because the chorus doesn't serve that purpose. I think it's really because this play is not well written. Like the language from the chorus is not poetical or enthusiastic enough to bring out that emotion. I understand that language-wise, it's much better. Like it's not as Shakespearean, because I feel like if Shakespeare gonna write the chorus, the language is gonna be clamor enough to really enthuse us, to bring out more sympathy we have towards Prometheus. So we already are sympathetic. It's just the chorus doesn't like really hit the mark yet. But what I noticed is in the play, Prometheus always like have this very composed calm, explaining his suffering, but within very limited words, right? That really is along with the Apollinian principle, the clarity. I'm not going to actually explain too much or complaining or lament about my suffering. It's all in there. I have to be composed. It's, I think, lessons, that writer, I don't know, like he wrote that book on Lacan, about the sculpture, Greek sculpture. He said the Apollinian principle is indeed this noble simplicity and quite grandeur. So I think that's totally manifested in this play in Prometheus. And then the playwright, I forgot his name, he brings out the chorus to make a straight comparison between the two. And also later the Io, the daughter of the river, she's like really, really overly, how can I say, like her emotions like over the top, right? Quite exaggerated. So that makes a stark contrast as well. So I think that play is very, very well balanced between the two. Like, I think that really ties back to Nietzsche's, like the notion as well. So I think it's quite good. It's just a language-wise, I feel like it's just not Shakespearean enough. It's not poetical enough.
Okay, well, one of the difficulties is dealing with a translator. I don't know if you read the PDF that I provided. That's what I read this time.
Yes.
It had different numbers for the portions of the play, and the numbers that were not in brackets were the English lines ended, and the numbers in brackets were where the Greek lines ended. So the Greeks, this was written in poetry. This was lyric poetry from beginning to end. There was a musical accompaniment, and the chorus is wailing and beating their heads and they're wearing these masks that capture that sense of sorrow and grief on their face. And it's a much richer emotional experience. And that's what's coming to this. I agree with you about, and I sort of agree with you, but I don't know how lofty the original Greek was. I think it was virtually Shakespearean in the Greek sense. This was very high cultured stuff, and carried a different weight for them than it does for us. And so if you were to read it again, that's why I provided some of these pictures earlier. Put that in your head and imagine the spectacle of the whole thing, because it's just extraordinary. You're just a wreck watching and listening. Seriously, there wasn't a dry eye in the house that night. And
sorry, Lindsay, just one more point. Sorry. I get what you're saying about like the virtually Shakespearean, the essence in it, definitely. Because when we compare to the Alcestis, like I know I'm not going to talking about right now, but you can see the very, very distinctive language difference in the between. Like Euripides is very kind of mathematical. His language is very plain, like compared to the Prometheus Bound, right?
Oh,
but
yeah.
It's really plain. It's like, so that's not poetical at all. I can understand the difference in the translation. I think the translator is trying his best to bring out like that poetical element out, but I'm just saying compared to Shakespeare gonna be like, but I'm not gonna say, I know it's evident, but yeah.
Okay. Maybe it's better to talk about Homer instead of Shakespeare. You're going to be in for a treat. I don't know if you've read ahead, if you've read 9 and 10 yet, but the reason I chose this pairing of the plays is that Prometheus represents the kind of tragedy that Nietzsche is celebrating. And Alcestis, or Alcestis, you could actually both seem to be okay, is a very different experience. The chorus is just it's not even there anymore for all practical purposes. The emotional content of Alcestis is completely different. and you are experiencing it in a different way and locating your emotions in a different space on the stage. Jason.
Yeah, I just have a question about, you talk about the tragedy is a fusion of the Apollinian and the Dionysian, and I want to know, that's your interpretation or that's Nietzsche's word? By the way, when you talk about fusion, I just want to make it clear, fusion is not union, and fusion means more dynamic relation, is not harmonious union. Yeah.
What Nietzsche said, I didn't make that part up. I just kept it so that we could keep the discussion to what Nietzsche is saying. He identified tragedy, the uniqueness of the tragic art form, mostly Sophocles and Aeschylus, was the marriage, let's put it that way, of the Apollinian and the Dionysian. The Dionysian is expressed in Apollinian imagery, dream image. And that's that, without that dream image supplied by that artistic impulse to give form and structure, there wouldn't be an expression on the stage of the horror and grief that they feel at what they're witnessing in Prometheus. In Alcestis, totally different kind of approach. Now.
Oh, okay. So one more thing, I think I read somewhere talking about the great tragedy play is celebration Dionysian's birthday. Am I right?
Yeah.
Or
Well, I don't know that he had a birthday. I think it was a festival.
celebrate Dionysian, right? The Dionysus, right? Okay, yeah.
The theater itself was called the Theater of Dionysus at Athens. Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple of comments in regard to what we're talking about. First of all, let me just say that I did read another translation of Prometheus Bound, one written maybe more like 100 years ago. It was all lyric poetry, very overly Shakespearean, if you will, with everything rhyming and so forth. So it's just a matter of translation, I would say. The translation that Lindsay shared to us is a pretty modern rendering, spoken in our language, so more accessible to us, if you will, than to others. But clearly, it's a matter of translation. But the more important thing I wanted to say was, I think I'm on the side of Lindsay, which says that it's Apollonian and Dionysian are unified or fusion. I think that's the whole idea, because there are several times when in the text that we've read, when he talks about, like, for instance, the chorus is the start of the dialogue. And you can't have a dialogue with just one. So it's essential to have the Dionysian talking to the Apollinian, if you will, and that dialogue happening. The Dionysian is also the place where, when we talk about, there was also an analogy of thing in themselves and appearance at one point in the text. And the thing in itself, the more real core associated with the Dionysian, and the appearance associated with the Apollonian. I can't find it in the text itself clearly. So as far as I believe that even in the Prometheus Bound, we can look at the chorus as reacting to what they're seeing in Prometheus, the Apollonian, and when they describe it, they're expressing maybe our reaction, if you will, to what they see naturally. So there is that dialogue clearly that occurs. So you can't have one without the other. They have to be together. But then I can also understand where George is coming from, because when Nietzsche talks about it here, his contribution is the chorus. His revelation to us is the importance of the chorus. And that's why there's a lot of discussion on the chorus. And one of the things that Nicole mentioned about the chorus, kind of about comfort or about the, you know, the pain and all that is gone or subsumed in the chorus, I thought was very, I forgot about that. But in the text, it is actually described by Nietzsche and described in my translation. He calls it the metaphysical comfort that comes with the Dionysian. The metaphysical comfort, which is one sentence I'll just read, but a long one. The metaphysical comfort with which I am suggesting even now, every true tragedy leaves us, that life is at the bottom of things, despite all the changes of appearances, indestructibly powerful and pleasurable. This comfort appears in incarnate clarity in the chorus of satyrs, a chorus of natural beings who live ineradicably, as it were, behind all civilization and remain eternally the same, despite the changes of generations and of the history of nations. So I thought that was a well put thing, that reminder that Nicole brought up and made me read back to this text. Anyway, that's my contribution for the day.
Yeah, thanks. Is that, you mean you're done now? You're never going to say another word? Okie dokie. James.
Yeah, just finally, I just wanted to thank George for bringing up Zeus's authoritarianism. This idea that they definitely what Euripides is bringing up, this kind of power, the will of Zeus that is so terrible that he could wipe out entire races. We know what we call that now. It's like this is the kind of a critique, right, of the authoritarian nature of Zeus in the pantheon. So I think it's a very important statement about the religion, the critique, a religious critique that Euripides is bringing forward. So I think it's really hard to ignore.
Well, that was why I made a point of this was the first democracy in the world. And so all of this talk about tyrants and tyranny and misrule and all this speaks to 17,000 people sitting in the audience watching this in very, very personal terms, because that's it in the world at that time. And so a lot of what Prometheus is about is Prometheus is a rebel. He's a dependent spirit, which is another Apollinian sort of approach to the text itself, some of the ideas. Anyway, George.
He's pro-human.
Just very quickly, responding to Nicole's comments, which is that I think for Nietzsche, man is of two minds. Certainly, he wants order, right? He wants to be able to go about his business, so to speak. But I think Nietzsche's point is that, in essence, the real authentic man is the chorus, right? And indeed, I think that in some ways, I think even the idea that he's saying this is a democracy, right? What is he saying? I think ultimately he's saying democracy is mobocracy, right? Because this is really the way that people really feel. They want to be, the Dionysian is what gives them pleasure and gives them authenticity and what they want to act on. And so it's a very Hobbesian concept. I'm just invoking Hobbes here, which is to say that order has to come from outside. So I think in the end, really, this is actually quite a critique of democracy, in my opinion. Order has to come from outside. Order has to be given by Zeus, right? And in some ways, we're going to feel Zeus is a tyrant, but on the other hand, we're going to be thankful that Zeus is keeping order. He's not letting the mob come and get and kill me, right? And so that's my read of it.
Okay, so you think Aeschylus is approving of tyranny?
I think what happens is, it's not that he's necessarily approving of tyranny, but tyranny, I think the comment is that tyranny is necessary. right? That if indeed democracy is mobocracy,
Let me
that's what I
stop.
think the real claim is.
Okay. If you can find that in the text, I will give you a prize because I don't think it's there. So I think that's something you're bringing in that's just not in the play.
Well, this is a long time debate about Nietzsche, the notion of Superman.
No.
Right.
We're talking about Aeschylus and Prometheus.
I know you are.
Way down the road. Way
I know.
down.
I know.
Okay. Jason.
Yeah, I just want to probably the same subject and share my experience because I read this one group with Lindsay probably 2 years ago during the pandemic, and I read it. I really like this one, and I didn't know why. And then during these 2-3 years, I heavily read Plato. Okay, so until today, I realize why I like it. Because it's a pre-Platonic idea, right? Pre-Socratic. So it's freedom, democracy is on the main subject. And I think that's the reason I like it. So I think the future generation should read this one first, then read Plato, then get a better idea what's Plato's talking. Just my thought.
Interesting. That's an interesting thought. Thanks for that. Nick.
Yeah, I just kind of reacting and totally disagreeing with what George said because I believe this play shows Zeus in a very bad light, overextending his powers and so forth. The fear that what a tyrant could do, who with unchecked powers, and 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 clearly in secondary sources where this play has secondary comments, they try to underscore whenever the audience hears the word tyrant, the audience reacts because that is, shall we say, a dirty word in that society. It is so. So they are. This is something very pro-democracy at this point. I would say.
Yeah,
And that's how I read it.
I wouldn't even go that far. I would just suggest that it is an audience of democratic citizens. And so these comments about tyrants and rulers and all the rest. Prometheus is a rebellious hero. He is the hero of the play. And he has Oceanus comes first, and Oceanus is one of his friends and tries to persuade him, like, no, just come on, lighten up, whatever, do something, whatever he's trying to get him to say. And then Hermes comes along later on, and Hermes is just Zeus's stooge. And he's trying to use some kind of rationality or something to get him to, come on, like, give this up. You're going to be here forever. This is a dumb thing to be doing. And I think that's intentional on the part of Aeschylus to have those contrasting approaches. And still Prometheus says, no, I'm not. I'm going to stay here until he frees me. He has foresight and all that. So that helps.
I think if I can just clarify though, I think my comment, especially in the light of what we hear Nietzsche say, because Nietzsche points out that these are not political themes that are being brought out in this place. It's religious underscoring. Yes. And the reason I bring it up is because the commentary sometimes about this play points out that some sensitivity about the word tyrant and stuff like that is somewhat political. There's no getting away with some political, if you will, even if it's not mainly that, there is some side effect, if you will, on the political sensitivity for them.
Well, I would think that would be part of the what you were expressing, of the joy of life in a way that would even enhance the way the democracy would be feeling about itself. Like we're not putting up with that stuff anymore. And you come away with this kind of awareness and knowledge you may not have necessarily had going in, even though it was a religious festival. That's an important thing to keep in mind. James.
Yeah, perhaps the audience was thinking kind of like Aristotle was writing later in his history, in the politics, about how there were so many tyrants, in Greek history. So it was just a word that people used to refer to somebody who was all in charge because they had all the armor and all the horses and stuff like that, right? But this one thing at line 30 in the Greek line 30 is a really good quote from Hephaestus. He says, "You will never sleep. You will also scream in pain and sorrow, for Zeus's heart is pitilessly harsh, and everyone whose ruling power is new is cruel and heartless." And I noticed this about both, Aeschylus and Euripides, that they're aware, right, and talk about human emotions and human what is it, human nature, right? They believe that there's a human nature. When he says everyone whose ruling power, all whose ruling power is new, is cruel and ruthless. So he would say, like, any person who would be given all the power at once would be cruel and ruthless. Now that's saying a lot about humans, let alone of the gods that had just defeated the Titans, right? The tremendously powerful and brave gods who had just staged the revolution. This is I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily call it a political comment, but it's an example of the psychological insight that these authors had.
Yeah, I don't think it was an overtly political statement, but it would sort of influential in a political kind of way. George.
So I understand that to some degree, what I'm arguing is counterintuitive. I mean, the word tyrant is used, and I understand that has an unequivocal negative connotation. And this notion that everyone who's new and rules, is cruel. I nevertheless would submit that Nietzsche, in arguing that the public is Dionysian, right? That in the end, what he is arguing is that it is the elites that bring order. And even that notion, everyone's new in power is cruel. I would submit that that's really a claim that they have to be cruel. That's not necessarily a harsh judgment. They have to be cruel. Now, in the end, what you also have to ask, I submit, again, I grant you, and I know what you're saying, Lindsay, I'm reading this with maybe what you're going to say is a jaundiced eye. And maybe I am. I have a certain set of preconceptions about Nietzsche, and I'm reading those preconceptions into this text. But I can't help, okay? I can't help but read into this that what Zeus is doing, perhaps, is being too Apollonian, right? That's his tyranny. He's being too Apollonian. He's imposing too much reason. And again, the people are Dionysian, right? That's really what they are. Now, again, maybe the argument is, that all rulers, now tyrant, of course, is a very negative word, right? You want a monarch, you don't want a tyrant. So ultimately, people can't abuse their powers, ultimately. Nietzsche's not arguing, well, maybe he is actually arguing that just elites have absolute and total power and they could do whatever they want. And even if he's a tyrant, he's right to do it because he's the president, right? Indeed, we get that argument now. Whatever the president does is right. So even when the president's a tyrant, he's still right. He's still legal, right? And so, and I understand, we could talk about governance and the politics of governance in this, and I'm not saying I want to go down that road by any measure. But to me, I'm going to key on this, that the notion that he casts the public as Dionysian is, I would submit, the more important aspect of this than any direct commentary on Zeus as a tyrant or a monarch. Thank you.
Okay. the Apollinian and the Dionysian are artistic impulses, not states of people's existence. So I would like to say that for one. And just a quick reminder of, I don't know if you can read what I've got over me, it's a popular error having the strength of one's convictions. Rather, courage is having strength for an attack on one's convictions. You can't find, Prometheus is the hero of the play. And he's rebelling against tyrannical power. And I don't know how you can interpret that any other way. Nicole.
Sorry, just want to say. Oh, sorry. Okay. I think what George said is very interesting. I wouldn't say I agree with you, but I think it's great to have your own interpretation on things, you know, like as long as interesting, it's fascinating. But one thing you said about Zeus being the, you know, the president, and he imposes too much reason. But that is actually a very contradictory statement, because Zeus is indeed the antithesis of orders, and even like he tried to give order, but look at what he done. He's just a chaos. He's very, very emotional, and he doesn't know what the heck he's doing, you know, right? So I think that's interesting. And also I think I understand where coming from about this, like a political statement, like, you know, you kind of interpret it in like a poetical way, but I feel like sometimes not everything is about politics. I think maybe Nietzsche's later, you know, like works and his ideas are tied back to the, you know, like the elitist theory, right? But I think in this one, in the Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, I think it's quintessentially aesthetical. Let's just embrace it in like the purely aesthetical kind of reign, instead of like, you know, thinking about politics. I don't think it's anything to do with politics. Like what you said, this is really interesting, because you said we have to embrace our emotions, not thinking everything about reasons, rationality, but it's not criticism, it's some observation. And then the way how you interpret this play, you come back to the political reign. So my question is, do you think it's kind of like an internal conflict between yourself, like the rationality and the emotional side? Like you want to be more emotional, but you know, interpret things like in a more rational, logical way. It's interesting, because I think I'm doing the same as well a lot of times, but I tend to be more emotional actually. I try to be more Apollinian, because I'm, you know, essentially a little bit chaotic. So
No,
I think
Apollonian is an Apollonian reason and order. Let me
Yeah.
just say this. I'm just going to say this, and this is a lot. I'm going to be very quick on this, which is that in my mind, the only thing I'm going to say to that point, Nicole, and again, I understand the straight up read of it. I understand the straight up read. I guess my simple point is that if Nietzsche's just going to bring up the straight up read, I don't see why he has to bring it up. Right? If it's just like, okay, this is nothing more than a tyrant and people are rebelling against him, why draw the comment on it? Why go out of your way to comment on it? Again, that's just simply what I'm going to say. So that's why I have a counterintuitive read, but okay.
Prometheus is a play by Aeschylus. Nietzsche did not write this play. Right?
No, I know.
Yeah, he didn't comment on it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
only talking about the play, George.
Yeah, but we're talking about Nietzsche's theory of how tragedy came to be. And the reason I chose Prometheus is because I think it's and when we get to, I think it's section 9 or section 10, there's an extended discussion of Prometheus. So I thought it would be worthwhile reading it before we got there. So that's when we can bring in some other stuff. I don't think at this point that Nietzsche was particularly, just speaking about Nietzsche for a moment, political, but he was a critic of German culture. And I did point that out earlier. There was some dispute about whether I was accurate or not on that. But there are several little remarks that are tossed out along the way that just sort of indicate that Nietzsche himself was not very fond of the culture that he was living in. Jason.
Yeah, I don't want to miss the word. You say Nietzsche doesn't like this play?
No, he does. He does like.
Oh, okay, okay. That's why I have to make sure I clear.
What I was saying is that this is the quintessential tragedy that he is trying to explain. How did this come to exist in the world? A play that's basically about a guy getting
Okay,
nailed
that's-
to a rock, and the chorus is just helpless. They can't do anything except wail, and he is their benefactor. Everything they have in life, he has given them, and he admits that later on. He tells that's part of that whole big spiel about what he gave to human beings. And that's why this is so horrifying for them. This is unjust in their sense. So it's a moral issue that's being argued here. Oh, no, I thought there was, okay, we didn't get to Alcestis yet, and there's not a lot to say. Do you guys want to hang out for another 15 minutes or so? Because I
Okay.
can explain. I did the two. I did the two.
Go ahead and you say what you need to. Yeah.
Well, I don't need to. I can put it off till next week. But no, the reason I chose Alcestis is because it's the antithesis of what Prometheus is in terms of tragedy. And Nietzsche is going to develop this theory. And you're going to see how this is that the kind of tragedy that Prometheus is died at Euripides' hands. This goes further. This is a bigger development. But when you compare the two, the chorus is negligible in Alcestis. The chorus has hardly anything to do. The chorus is central to the emotional content of Prometheus. And that's the big, big difference between the two. So suddenly the Apollinian has taken over. There is no, and it's a little more complicated than that, but that was what I was hoping you would notice between the two. Alcestis is much more modern feeling than Prometheus. Prometheus is classical. It's Homeric in its own way. It's got an epic reach that Alcestis doesn't have. It's just people who are doing these things and they, whatever it is. It's a very, very different experience. And so drama, and the way we think of drama today, is the child of Euripides. And Nietzsche is going to get into why that is in the next two sections. So that's why I thought if we do this now, then you'll already have that experience of what Nietzsche is trying to get at. So that's what the whole this thing was about. James.
Yeah, I don't quite understand why you're saying that the chorus is less important, because it seems to me that a lot of the debate happens in the chorus between chorus members, perhaps. The chorus is actually arguing amongst themselves, I think. So and the actors are gone. The actors are pretty much left alone, with nothing to do. So there's not. I don't think it's like that at all, that the chorus is an important, because there's a lot of debate that's going on. Maybe you didn't find that interesting, what the chorus has to debate. But what I really enjoyed, I didn't read quite all of it, but what I really enjoyed was the facts that the ideas of the Cinderella thing, that if you father remarries a stepmother, then the stepmother becomes the enemy of the children. These things are still talked about in psychology, modern psychology books all the time. That's just like everything that's known about human, basically human relations is kind of like in this play. A lot of the ideas. There's another one too. The idea of like who is a coward, who is not a coward, and things like that. The coward is not the one who understands what he wants. The coward is not the one who the coward is not the one who knows what he wants. Not the coward, but never mind. I got it backwards. But the idea that it's better to understand other people as well as yourself. You know, that kind of idea is put across in this play. And the relationship between between the husband and his parents, you know, that he basically, it's basically you hate your parents for what they do because they seem to be doing it to you. And this reminds me when I was a kid. That happened to me when I was a kid. In other words, I would be embarrassed in front of my parents and things like that would come up, you know. So it's like these things actually happen in life. The tremendously bad relationships in the family that occur because of decisions of husbands, or perhaps weak, you know, maybe there are women that are a pain to their husbands, you know, most of the time. You certainly see things about that, but it's not predominant in the popular culture, but maybe it is a more important factor that that should be talked about more. So that's all. Yeah.
There's the emotional power of Prometheus overwhelms the emotional power of Alcestis, and the chorus, and you'll find Nietzsche thinks this too, so I'm not the only one, is just another character on the stage. In Prometheus, the chorus is the wall, and you are in that pit with them. In Alcestis, you've got to pick who you identify with, who you like, who that character is, who's the funny guy. It's a very modern experience of drama. That is not true of Prometheus. Prometheus is a titan. And the chorus is horrified, and you as the audience are horrified with them because you already know the story. And now you're seeing the story. It's like the difference between reading a book and seeing it in a movie. Very different experiences. So the aesthetics of Prometheus are way different in their impact than Alcestis. And that was why what I wanted to really kind of, it's hard to get out of reading. It really is. I've had the fortune to have seen Prometheus performed, and it's an astonishing experience, even for a modern person, compared to, you know, a movie that Meryl Streep makes about, you know, Osage, August, or whatever the heck it was. You know, they're very different. The structure of the characters in Prometheus, it's the gods' messengers who are you are seeing personified on the stage. That's not true of Alcestis at all. And when you get to 9 and 10 in Nietzsche, you'll see how important this proves to be for his thesis, not mine necessarily. Jason.
Yeah, I think I just want to say I agree with you or agree with Nietzsche, because I supposedly Prometheus will be much boring, right? Because there's no story. We know what's going on. It's there and nothing happened. But how do you call it? Alcestis, right? Supposed to be more fun. It has story. The wife died, resurrect. Heracles coming. Something, but I don't feel the dynamic, the power. Okay, on this Alcestis, right? So I that's why I say I agree with you, or agree with Nietzsche. And then question would be, is that how comedy start to develop? Because the beginning is tragedy, right? And this one is not tragedy, it's kind of comedy. So is that how comedy develop after tragedy? That's probably my question or my observation.
Yeah, that'll come out in the next two sections. So because he discusses that very straightforwardly. Nick.
Yeah, I haven't read chapter 9 or 10 of the tragedy, but yeah, it's because I got lazy. But I think Euripides to me is a natural progression of how things would be, because this is the birth of tragedy at the beginning, right? When he talks about what happens. And like a child at birth, the world is like, in some ways, binary, good versus bad, you know, intellectual versus emotional kind of thing. But as life progresses, as we grow, you're teenagers, you get hormonal, things get complicated, kind of like, and life is complicated. There's more than one or more than two sides. So now we've got all these complexities, and the drama just reflects that. And as the more sophisticated one is, the more one can absorb all these things. That's just the way it will happen. And society is growing. They're getting tired of the baby talk at that point. I'm sorry. That is my, and
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how my naive view compares with how how a genius like Nietzsche thinks about this thing.
Yeah, well, just keep the focus in your mind, I think, on Nietzsche is trying to uncover the birth of tragedy. That's the beginning. And I think he's come closer than anybody else I'm familiar with. And I don't think this notion has been refuted. I'm not sure you could refute it, that it began with the dithyrambs, and then you have Aeschylus and Sophocles, two completely different kinds of playwrights than Euripides. And a lot of the feelings that he has, again, it's worth remembering, he's 28 years old, this is his first book. He's working out his own thoughts, and a lot of these considerations will change as time goes by. But the basic birth of tragedy, I don't think he ever abandoned that. But some of the things that he's likely to say down the road, the next 7 chapters, or 5, 6, we have 6 more to go. Yeah, 6. 7, sorry. He didn't hold firmly. This whole thing again, courage of your convictions, courage to change your convictions. Nietzsche developed and matured and grew out a lot of the things that he thought here. And when we read the preface at the end, the preface will mean a lot more than if we read it to start with and then started plowing through the book, I think. So that's why we're going to do that at the end instead of the beginning. So don't just absorb him with a beginner's mind. That was that whole idea at the very beginning. You're in 1887. This is his first book. You don't know about Superman and Zarathustra and all. You don't know any of that. Okay, you know it, but you don't know it. So you have to act like you don't know all that stuff. Nicole.
I just feel like even it's his like very earlier work, but it, like what George said, it's the most authentic emotion coming out of him. So I feel like from that perspective, this is maybe one of his best, in terms of the aesthetical value in it. Another thing I wanted to say is I really like how Lindsay you structure the whole, like the meetup for us. I think this meeting is so important in terms of let us get a taste of the difference between the aesthetical, like the play, and also the play written by playwrights who are more pragmatic. Euripides, in the sense of Euripides. So I really appreciate this. It's really amazing. And another thing you said about the emotional content of Prometheus, I really love this line. The emotional content, what like it is indeed, like the two oppositions. But I also wanted to say something about what James mentioned about the I'll never pronounce the name, Alcestis. Okay, so I think I really like how you said about the things happened in the play resonate with your individual experiences in life, and that's a really, really interesting mark. The thinking about this, I think Euripides writes from such a pragmatic way. He has so many life experiences which are so lifelike. So he put into his plays, it's not necessarily very poetical or have this overpowering emotional thing, but you feel like this is something you can encounter in real life. But one thing I want to mention is, I only read a couple of pages. If you see the wife, the wife who's actually going to be condemned to death, her reaction, in a very kind of epical poem sort of setup, the wife should have this very kind of, like, I'm going to sacrifice, I'm going to endure his pain, don't worry, my husband, blah, blah, blah. That sort of statement she should be making. But look at the play, what she said. She said, oh my God, I'm so, like, I think on page 7 or 8, I forgot, she said something like, she's not happy about it. Because she was willing to take the place for her husband. So she's like, I'm not happy about it. Why should I do this? Put me into this misery. And then when the husband went up to her to talk to her, don't leave me, don't go. And she's like, you have to remember the sacrifice I'm doing for you. So you have to look after my kids, blah, blah, blah. So it's literally like the ordinary everyday conversation gonna have with the husband alive. Obviously, it's not poetical. It's not gonna touch us, but that's life, right? Yeah. So I think that's Euripides. I think he shouldn't be a playwright. He should be just like maybe a writer or something. But he's not good for poetical language for sure.
Okay.
That's what. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
Aristotle thought of Euripides as the most tragic of the poets, and he has a very different sense of tragedy, I think, and because I think what you just said is why Aristotle made that observation. He's thinking of tragedy in the way, I'm making this up, I don't know what Aristotle thought of tragedy the way we think of tragedy today, not the way the classical tragedy is constructed and performed. So just we really have to keep that in mind moving forward from here, and then we're finally going to be okay with how this the rest of the book. The rest of the book makes a compelling case in its own way for something altogether different. We've sort of reached a turning point here, and then the next 7 chapters or sections develop a whole other kind of argument. It's a bit of a lament for what he has identified as the classical tragedies, but we'll see when we get there. James.
I was just going to mention that there's only one mention of Alcestis in the entire book. So
yeah.
It's not like he's comparing it to Prometheus. He's just bringing the chapter to a close by talking about the action that happens in Alcestis as being an example of a really good example of a Dionysian spectacle, but tightly combined with the Apollinian dream world. Much more tighter connection, perhaps, than his description of Euripides and the rest of the writing.
Yeah, no, I made this selection, so that was the deal. And just because of the contrast between the two and what I expressed a little bit earlier, and Euripides is part of the discussion to come. So now you've sort of had a taste of Euripides if you hadn't before, and you'll know what he's talking about. You're right. He's much more concerned with Prometheus as a poem than he is Alcestis. Nick.
Wanted to ask Lindsay what if you could give us a preview of the trajectory of this meetup. Where are we going with how far are we going with Nietzsche?
We're done. How far are we going? We're going.
Yeah, I mean, what is the path you're doing? Because I don't know how deep we're going to get with him. Are we going to follow him up to his end state of insanity, or
go to yeah, we are. Go to the webpage and you'll see all the things I have selected. The only one, well, the aphoristic works, we're skipping the first 2, starting with the gay science or the joyful wisdom, depending on how you.
Are you going to? How about untimely meditations? Are you going to skip that too?
What?
Untimely meditations?
I'm going to skip 2. We're going to do 2 of them. Schopenhauer's Educator and the Uses and Abuse of History for Life. We're going to do those. We're going to skip David Strauss and whatever the other one. Oh, Richard Wagner, Ed Bayreuth. We're going to skip that too.
So are we going to be together for a year or so on this, or
2, 3, 4? I'm going to die doing it.
Yay! Love
So
it.
we commit our life here. So that's what we are going to do.
We don't have a Greek mountain to be fastened to, but you know, it's,
Unless you find
it could be
the,
arranged, right?
you have to
It's
find
just
the substitute. Okay, just
I don't know
like
if I don't know if I have that many years left in my.
No, I certainly don't. So Jason is going to have to take over somewhere down the road. Nicole.
Sorry, I just want to say something. What Jason said is interesting. Jason said it's really fun to read the Alcestis. Like, I just want to ask Lindsay your opinion on this, because I know James loves it and Jason thinks it's fun. For me, I feel like, it's fascinating. I don't like the language. In the beginning, I have this repulsion towards this play because that's like, this is the language is not very poetical, because I like everything that is poetical. But like the responses you gave from the characters, I only read a couple of pages, so I might be wrong, but I feel like it's very unpredictable. It's not exactly what I thought would be said by the characters. So I found that's interesting, and I wanted to read it along. So what do you think,
It's not one of my favorite plays at all.
Okay.
It's a crying experience. Euripides.
It's a crying experience.
When Euripides approaches the more classical structure, like the Bacchae is really amazing. The Trojan Women is an amazing piece of work. And there's out of 17, I'm sure there's at least one more that I really like. Medea. That's another one that's really powerful. And that's very, very different. This is kind of the throwaway, just for the sake of comparison, easy read. That's why
I just wanted to try to appreciate things like from different perspective, like try to challenge my own aesthetical judgment sometimes. So like, but I hear what you mean. I agree with you. Yeah, but yeah, it's interesting.
I read mostly a different translation. I like to have a couple available, and I read the one at perseus.tufts.edu, which of course is great for everything Greek, if you like to look at Greek, read Greek and translate it and things. But that translation is I think it's a little more straightforward, and I didn't have any issues with it. In other words, where I had some issues with this translation, I thought the other translation was more straightforward, and I think it's a more modern style of writing from Euripides. I think that's coming through. I think in that translation, that this is a more modern approach, and they also split up the chorus. And I don't know if that's maybe just an interpretation of the original, but they do split the chorus in this translation, which helps explain why they're arguing back and forth, and so forth.
Yeah, there was a classical structure to the choral odes. And that's not even clear in Prometheus, and I'm not sure it existed in Prometheus, because the chorus doesn't seem to have a lot to say. They just react and ask a question and then lament some more along the way. Jason.
Yeah, I just want to, since we already discussed two playwriters, and then how does the Antigone, which is another one I really like, Antigone by Sophocles, right? And how does the Sophocles play in? Is that in between, or how does we play?
They're all contemporaries, roughly. Sophocles and I think Euripides were both writing at the same time. Aeschylus was the first.
Okay.
Not the very first, but the first one that survived. He's the oldest of the tragedians. And Euripides and Sophocles were contemporaries. I think that's the case. Yeah, I forgot what I was going to say. There was some comment that you made about that. No, it's just those. If you want to really have a treat, if you've really had a good time with this so far, read the Orestes Aeschylus. It's the only completely extant trilogy, and the three plays are, one is Agamemnon, which is returning from Troy, and his Cassandra is with him, and his wife has taken a lover, and they murder him, and then there's this whole parade of revenge and vengeance. And it culminates in a surprising way in the third tragedy. It's well worth reading to get a sense of
Who wrote it?
Aeschylus.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's Agamemnon, the Eumenides, and the libation bearers and the Eumenides, but they're all in one volume everywhere. And that's a great experience. But when you do it, try to just go with what I was saying earlier. They're not just words on a page to that audience. There's music, there's spectacle, there's masks. The masks are so powerful in just creating an emotion, just at the mere sight. You know? So anyway, all right. So next, I'm going to put up tomorrow. I'll have the new one up for 9. I'm going to do 9 and 10. We probably won't get all the way through the 10. But we're going to be able to crank it up here, I think, from here on out. And James, Nick, just check the syllabus and you'll see all of and I have the links are all to free editions available online. And you'll see well, the only one I'm skipping, unless when we get to Zarathustra, where it would be, if you want to do Zarathustra, we can do Zarathustra. I will give in, but I really don't want.
I'm also not a great Zarathustra fan, but also I wasn't born in the 19th century, so.
Yeah, right. And you were the German soldier in World War I either. So.
Do you
Yeah, if you're in
have
World War I, you probably want to read it in the trenches. Yeah.
Do you guys have a recommendation and a biography of Nietzsche? I've never read about his life actually, so.
It's a short one. There's an intellectual biography that Walter Kaufmann wrote back in the 50s. It's just called Nietzsche, Philosopher, blah, 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 Antichrist. And it's great, but it's a deep dive into Nietzsche's philosophy. R.J. Hollingwood wrote the most straightforward biography. R.J. Hollingwood, Hollingwood, really easy. And he was also a contemporary of Kaufmann's and translator, and I think they even collaborated somewhere. So that's what I would recommend. There may be more recent, because that again is from the 60s, probably or the 70s, but I don't think there's been a lot that
I think I have the book Life as Literature, or Nietzsche, Life as Literature. I don't know if you read that. I've not dug into it, but I don't know I have that book.
I don't either. There
It's
must be some.
the sense that he lived his life like he was writing literature about his life. I mean, something like that. It's an interpretation. Anyway.
Yeah, it's true.
Well,
there is a link to that.
But the Hollingwood book is just a straightforward biography, pretty much. So if you just want the details, and it's really interesting because his relationship with Wagner is really good to know. It was very important to the things he learned and thought about along the way. And anyway, okay, wow. I'll see you guys.
All right, thank you. See you.